right now in the pristine, temperature-controlled laboratories of Silicon Valley. Some of the wealthiest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth are pouring billions of dollars into a singular obsessive pursuit. They are funding startups focused on telomere lengthening, cellular senescence, and blood transfusions. They are experimenting with hyperbaric chambers, extreme caloric restriction, and genetic reprogramming. They are desperately trying to hack the biological clock. And what is the ultimate grand prize of all this unprecedented expenditure of wealth and scientific genius? To perhaps, if they are incredibly lucky, squeeze out a few extra decades. To hit 100, maybe 110 years old and still be able to recognize their own reflection in the mirror. We live in a culture that is utterly terrified of the ticking clock, obsessed with life extension, and willing to pay any price for just a little more time. But I want to take you out of the modern laboratory and transport you back to an ancient world. A world recorded in the earliest pages of human history, where the concept of time was so vastly different that our modern minds struggle to even comprehend the mathematics of it. I want you to imagine a reality where human beings were not just fighting for an extra decade, but where they were, quite literally, time billionaires. Open the book of Genesis, specifically chapter 5, and you encounter a genealogical record that reads less like a family tree and more like a ledger of immortals. You read about a man named Jared who lived for 962 years. You read about Lamech, who walked the earth for 777 years. You see Methuselah, reaching an astonishing 969 years. And of course, Adam himself, breathing the air of this planet for 930 years. In this ancient world, centuries were treated the way we treat decades. A man who was 200 years old was just getting started. He was in the prime of his youth. When modern people read these texts, the immediate instinct is to dismiss them. We assume these numbers must be metaphors. Perhaps they measured months as years, or perhaps it's just ancient myth-making designed to make their ancestors look like demigods. But the text itself doesn't allow for that easy dismissal. The genealogies are written with the precise, mundane rhythm of historical accounting. They tell us exactly how old a patriarch was when he had a specific son, and exactly how many years he lived afterward. It is presented not as a fairy tale, but as cold, hard data. So if we take this text seriously, we are confronted with a profound and unsettling mystery. We didn't just lose a few years of life expectancy somewhere along the evolutionary road. We lost entire eras of personal existence. Our biological clock didn't just wind down, it was shattered. What exactly happened between the days of Adam and the reality we live in today? How did we plummet from a lifespan of nearly a millennium down to the fragile 70 or 80 years that the psalmist speaks of? The answer is not found in an evolutionary accident. It wasn't a change in diet or a sudden shift in the climate. The drastic reduction of human life was a deliberate, surgical intervention by the Creator. And to understand why God would take the scalpel to human longevity, we have to investigate the darkest, most chaotic period of human history. We have to look at Genesis chapter 6. If you grew up in Sunday school, you probably have a very sanitized version of the pre-flood world in your head. You might picture a world that just got a little too rowdy, prompting God to hit the reset button with a flood. But the Hebrew text paints a picture that is infinitely more terrifying and far more psychologically complex. Genesis 6 introduces us to a world overrun by the Nephilim. Now, historically, people have obsessed over the physical stature of the Nephilim, picturing them merely as biological giants, towering physical freaks of nature roaming the landscape. But to focus only on their height is to miss the entire point of the text. The scriptures describe them as mighty men who were of old, men of renown. These were not just big men. They were ancient tyrants. They were warlords. They were architects of institutionalized oppression. The text pairs this reality with a specific Hebrew word to describe the state of the earth: chamas. You might hear that word and think of the modern geopolitical entity, but in biblical Hebrew, chamas means violence. But it doesn't just mean a bar fight or a random act of aggression. Chamas implies systemic, structural, pervasive violence. It is corruption so deeply embedded in the fabric of society that cruelty becomes the law of the land. And Driving this chamas was another crucial Hebrew concept introduced in Genesis 6, the Yetzer. The text says that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent, every Yetzer, every imagination, every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now I want you to pause and really think about the psychological implications of this. Imagine a ruthless dictator. Think of the worst tyrants of the 20th century. Men who built empires of suffering, who orchestrated genocides, who ruled with an iron fist. Now consider the fact that the only thing that eventually stopped them was their own biology. Their bodies gave out. Death, the great equalizer, dragged them to the grave after 60, 70, or maybe 80 years. Their reign of terror had a strict biological expiration date. But what if they didn't die? Imagine a brilliant sociopath, a man utterly devoid of empathy, possessing a genius-level intellect and an insatiable lust for power. Now give that man 900 years to live. Give him 9 centuries to perfect his craft of manipulation. Give him 900 years to accumulate wealth, to consolidate political power, to build unassailable empires of suffering. Give him the time to literally outlive generations of his enemies, crushing any hope of rebellion because the tyrant simply refuses to die. When you remove the natural check of mortality, you create a compounding interest of evil. In a world where the inclination of the human heart is bent toward wickedness, limitless time is not a blessing. It is the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. A fallen human being with a 900-year lifespan is a horror beyond comprehension. The longevity of the ancient patriarchs had been weaponized. The very breath of life that God had breathed into humanity was being used to sustain a perpetual engine of cruelty. It is within this terrifying context that we read the divine decree in Genesis 6:3. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." For centuries, people have read that verse and imagined a frustrated, petty God throwing his hands up in the air and imposing an arbitrary punishment. A cosmic landlord deciding to shorten the lease just to spite the tenants. But when you understand the sheer magnitude of the chamas, the systemic violence of the pre-flood world, this decree changes shape entirely. This wasn't a petty punishment. This was a divine quarantine. God was looking at a humanity that was literally torturing itself to death, a humanity that had learned how to use the gift of centuries to build hell on earth. By restricting the human lifespan, God was implementing a containment protocol. He was stepping into the timeline and putting a hard boundary on how much damage any single human being could inflict on the world. If you are finding this fascinating and want a guide that will truly help you uncover these profound biblical truths for yourself, click the link in the first pinned comment to learn more. But let's look closer at that specific number, 120 years. There is a brilliant, profound insight found in ancient rabbinic literature, particularly in the writings of Rashi and the Midrash, regarding this specific number. They point out that this 120-year decree was not an immediate, overnight biological cap on every individual. After all, Noah lived long after this decree, and so did his sons. Instead, they interpret this 120 years as a countdown. It was the time it took for Noah to build the ark. It was a collective window of grace. The Hebrew concept here is erek apayim, which translates to the long-suffering patience of God. It literally means long of nose, an idiom describing someone who takes a very long time to become angry. God did not simply look at the violence of the Nephilim and instantly flood the earth. He issued a decree, and then he set a 120-year timer. For over a century, the sound of hammers striking wood echoed across the ancient world. Every single day, that massive, absurd boat being built on dry land was a sermon. It was a tangible, unavoidable physical warning that time was running out. It was a deadline for repentance, but the warning was ignored. The flood came. The world was washed clean. And then, we witness one of the most fascinating biological transitions recorded in ancient literature. If you read the genealogies after the flood, you see
that God doesn't just snap his fingers and instantly reduce the human lifespan from 900 to 70. He doesn't shock the human system that violently. Instead, we see a gradual, methodical weaning process. Look at the numbers. Noah's son Shem lives for 600 years, a massive drop from his grandfather Methuselah, but still ancient. Then his son Arphaxad lives 438 years. A few generations later, Peleg lives 239 years.
Then we get down to Nahor, who lives 148 years. It is a mathematical decay curve. It is as if humanity is being slowly, generation by generation, detoxed from the drug of near immortality. The Creator is gently but firmly tightening the biological boundaries, bringing the human experience down to a scale where our fragility becomes undeniable. And why is that fragility so deeply necessary? Because endless time creates an illusion of godhood. When you read Genesis chapter 5, the chapter of the long-living patriarchs, there is a haunting, repetitive refrain that acts as the drumbeat of the chapter. And he died. Jared lived 962 years, and he died. Lamech lived 707 years, and he died. Methuselah lived 969 years, and he died. No matter how long you stretch the timeline, the grave always wins. But when you have 900 years ahead of you, death feels like a myth. It feels like something that happens to other people. You can delay repentance indefinitely. You can put off making peace with your brother for a century. You can ignore your Creator for half a millennium, because after all, there is always tomorrow. But when your life is reduced to 70 or 80 years, tomorrow is no longer a guarantee. It is a fragile, fleeting hope. This is the profound theological pivot that changes everything. We have to stop looking at the brevity of our lives as a curse and start recognizing it as an instrument of severe mercy. Moses understood this better than anyone. Moses, the man who wrote Genesis, who recorded the ages of the ancient immortals, also wrote Psalm 90. He is wandering in the wilderness, surrounded by a generation of Israelites who are dying off. And he writes these words: "The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years. Yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away." And then he prays one of the most important prayers in the entire biblical canon. So teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Notice what Moses is saying.
Wisdom doesn't come from living longer. Wisdom comes from realizing how short the time actually is. David echoes this exact sentiment in Psalm 39. He cries out, "Lord, make me to know my end. And what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am? Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you." This is the divine recalibration. By shortening our lives, God shattered the illusion of endless time. Mortality becomes the ultimate cure for human hubris. When you realize that your days are a mere handbreadth, you don't have time to hold a grudge for a century. You don't have the luxury of delaying your spiritual reckoning. The brevity of life forces an urgency that longevity completely destroyed. Death, in our fallen state, is the mechanism God uses to wake us up from the anesthesia of complacency. But the story doesn't end with us just accepting our short, fragile lives. Because into this severely restricted, radically shortened timeline, the most breathtaking event in human history occurs. God himself decides to enter the human story. Think about the supreme irony and the overwhelming beauty of the incarnation, when the author of life, the Ancient of Days, the Creator who dwells outside of time entirely, decides to wrap himself in human flesh. He does not claim the 900-year lifespan of his ancient ancestor, Adam. He doesn't show up and demand the longevity of Methuselah. He doesn't even take the 120 years of Moses. Jesus of Nazareth steps directly into the severely restricted, fragile, 70-year timeline of fallen humanity. He subjects himself to the exact same biological clock that ticks inside your chest right now. And the most staggering part, he doesn't even use half of it. He lives for merely 33 years. In just 33 years, an age where a man in the pre-flood world would still be considered an infant, Jesus Christ completely redefines the metric of a successful human existence.
He shatters our obsession with longevity and replaces it with a completely different paradigm. We measure life by length. Christ measures it by depth. To understand this, we have to look at the Greek language of the New Testament. The Greeks had different words for life. One of them is bios. This is where we get the word biology. Bios refers to mere biological duration, the beating of the heart, the respiration of the lungs, the firing of synapses. Bios is what the tech billionaires in Silicon Valley are spending their fortunes trying to extend. They want more bios. But Jesus didn't come to stretch our bios back out to 900 years. If he did, he would have just been returning us to the nightmare of Genesis 6. Instead, Jesus brought a different kind of life entirely. The Greek word is zoe. Zoe is not biological duration. Zoe is the uncreated, indestructible, divine life of God himself. It is a quality of life, not a quantity of time. When Jesus says in John 10:10, "I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly," the word he uses for abundantly, it's parison. It means superabundant, excessive, overflowing beyond measure. Jesus didn't come to give you a longer timeline. He came to inject indestructible Zoe into your brief, fragile decades of bios. Think about the profound implications of this. The victory of the cross was not about outliving death biologically. Jesus didn't defeat death by avoiding it for 1,000 years. He defeated death by walking straight into it at the age of 33, letting it do its absolute worst, and then breaking it from the inside out. He proved that a life utterly surrendered to the Father, even if it only lasts 3 decades, is infinitely more powerful than 9 centuries of selfish ambition. Which brings this vast, sweeping theological journey right down to the ground you are standing on today. It brings it directly into your living room, into your daily routine, into the very way you view the clock on your wall. Because just as the Greeks had 2 words for life, they also had 2 words for time. And understanding the difference between them is the key to navigating the restricted lifespan God has given us. The first word is chronos. This is sequential, ticking time. It's the calendar. It's the schedule. It's the alarm clock waking you up at 6 a.m. It's the time you spend sitting in traffic, waiting in line, doom scrolling on your phone. Chronos is the relentless mechanical march of seconds into minutes into hours. And if you are not careful, Chronos will grind you into dust. You will live your entire life just trying to get through the week, waiting for the weekend, waiting for retirement, until one day the clock stops. But there is a second word for time: kairos. Kairos is not a quantity of time, it is the quality of the moment. Kairos is the opportune moment, the pregnant moment, the appointed time. It is the moment when eternity intersects with the present. Kairos is that moment when you look across the room and realize you need to forgive someone right now. It's the moment you decide to put down your phone and actually look your child in the eyes. It's the moment you feel the quiet, undeniable conviction of the Holy Spirit prompting you to change the direction of your life. You cannot measure Kairos with a stopwatch. You measure it by the weight of its significance. The Apostle Paul understood this dynamic perfectly when he writes to the church in Ephesus, a group of people living in the chaotic pagan culture of the first century. He gives them a profound command. He tells them to walk circumspectly, not as fools but as wise. And then he uses a fascinating Greek phrase, exagorazontes ton kairon. Most English Bibles translate this as redeeming the time, but literally it means buying back the opportune moment. Paul is telling us that because our days are short and because the days are inherently prone to evil, we cannot afford to just float passively down the river of Chronos. We have to be active buyers. We have to snatch the Kairos moments out of the mundane ticking of the clock. The restriction of our lives to 70 or 80 years is precisely what forces us out of the complacency of Chronos and demands that we live in Kairos. Let me give you an analogy to make this perfectly clear. Imagine you are an artist, and I hand you a canvas. But this canvas is unlike any other. It has no borders. It stretches infinitely to the left, infinitely to the right, infinitely up, and infinitely down. There are no edges. If I give you that infinite canvas and ask you to paint a masterpiece, what are you going to do? chances are you will be paralyzed. You'll paint a little over here, maybe dabble a little over there. You'll take a nap, you'll wander off. There is no urgency because the canvas is infinite. No single brushstroke really matters. You can always fix it later. You can always paint somewhere else. An infinite canvas produces anxiety, procrastination, and ultimately, meaninglessness. But now imagine I take that infinite canvas away and I hand you a frame. It is a strict, rigid, unyielding frame. Let's call it 24 inches by 36 inches. It has hard borders. Suddenly, everything changes. Because the space is limited, every single square inch of that canvas becomes valuable. You cannot afford to waste paint. You have to make deliberate, intentional choices about where the dark tones go, where the light hits, what the focal point will be. The limitation itself is what forces you to create a masterpiece. The boundary is what gives your choices meaning. This is exactly what God did in Genesis chapter 6. Humanity was given a nearly infinite canvas of 900 years. And instead of painting a masterpiece of worship, we painted a grotesque nightmare of violence and tyranny. We used the endless time to institutionalize our own corruption. So God, in his severe and beautiful mercy, stepped in and built a frame. He said, I am giving you 70, maybe 80 years. He restricted the canvas, and in doing so, he made your life infinitely more valuable. You do not have 900 years to figure this out. You do not have centuries to waste harboring bitterness, chasing empty wealth, or ignoring the God who breathed life into your lungs. The divine recalibration has set the frame around your life. The borders are fixed. The question is no longer how long you will live. The tech billionaires can chase their telomeres and their cryogenic freezing all they want, but they are fighting a battle that was settled thousands of years ago. The biological clock will eventually stop for all of us. The real question, the only question that actually matters, is how are you painting your restricted canvas? Are you just surviving the chronos, watching the seconds tick away, hoping for a few moments of comfort before the end? Or are you stepping into the kairos? Are you buying back the moments? Are you allowing the indestructible Zoe life of Christ to fill the fragile temporary vessel of your bios? We need to stop obsessing over how to count more days and start focusing entirely on how to make our days count. We need to pray the prayer of Moses with a fierce, joyful urgency. Lord, teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Take a look at the frame God has given you. The time is short, but the opportunity for depth is infinite. I'd love to know how this perspective shifts the way you view your own timeline. Take a moment right now, drop into the comments, and let me know where in the world you are watching from. And more importantly, tell me what you are going to do today to buy back the time, to step out of the ticking clock and into the opportune moment.